Hey there, I'm Jessica Lauren Walton, and this is my interview corner. If there's a cool story in the security field or just something that I think is going to be helpful for my fellow professionals, then I want to talk about it. To learn more about the work I do as a writer, you can go ahead and visit my blog at www.jessicawaltonwriter.com. Today's guest is James Acuna, a recently retired senior case officer from the CIA. As James put it, when people find out that he's former CIA, they're either fascinated, uninterested, or they're terrified and they want to get away from him. So I can understand that last part, right? I can't understand how anybody would be uninterested in someone like James. I find his stories fascinating, as well as his perspectives on the human psyche. And that's basically what we're going to talk about today, the psychology behind a CIA case officer. Just one second. How cool is this mug, right? If you were wondering if I really live in the DC area, now you know. Ooh, girl's got to be caffeinated. I got a day job in addition to this blog. Anyhow, James and I are going to talk about what it takes to become a case officer in an intelligence agency. What kind of mindset or mental gymnastics do you have to employ to survive in this kind of position long term? And where's the off-ramp when you want to return to the civilian world? It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get in there and talk to James. Hi, James. Thanks for joining me today.
Good morning.
So I first want to congratulate you on your retirement from a long career in the CIA, and thank you for your service to our country. I don't think it's a coincidence that there are so many people from your profession in the movies because there are so many interesting psychological layers to a case officer. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So getting started, tell me a bit about your background joining the CIA and what made you an attractive recruit for case officer work.
Well, again, thank you for having me today. And I'll preface your question by saying everybody who joins the Central Intelligence Agency, whether that's in the Directorate of Operations, where I predominantly served, or in the other 4 directorates, they all have sort of this interesting path into it, right? You have people that they're third, second generation, their parents work there, and it's just sort of a natural succession that they go and join the CIA. You have sort of the people that live inside the Beltway, right, that have always had government jobs and they're looking for it. However, I would say 30%, 35%. It's just they have very different and unique paths into the agency, right? And so for mine, what was interesting about it was you asked me, what made me qualified. I wasn't, right? I was not qualified. The reason that I opted to switch, I was working for the Department of Defense. I was doing some really cool stuff with Special Operations Command and some of the tier 1, the Delta guys, the SEALs. I was doing some testing with them and I really enjoyed my
You
job.
were an engineer before, right?
Yeah, I was a naval architect, right? So I'm a naval architect and marine engineer. I used to work in shipyards, and you know what? Those jobs are very good and they're very stable. They pay decent salaries and you can be this great middle-class person, right? However, during the day, I was an engineer. At night, I was a firefighter. And I was a firefighter on 9/11, right? And so in Maryland. And ultimately, it was those 2 professions, the DoD stuff during the day and firefighting at night and the events of 9/11, that I pursued agency recruiters doggedly, right? Just I found one. I was like a dog in a bone with a bone. I would not let them go. However, this person was a recruiter for a different directorate, the Director of Science and Technology, which is where I started my career. And all the warning signs of going from somewhere like the Director of Science and Technology to the Director of Operations, everybody's like, can't do it. You're not qualified, you're an engineer, you're a linear thinker. We need people that are more dynamic, right? And so this is like early 2000s as well.
That probably pissed you off a bit. You're like, I'm a dynamic thinker. I'll show you.
Absolutely. And it actually took a funny story. It took about 3 years of transition. And that's like, once I got in, you're like 90% of the battle is getting in. But like once I got in, I was like, I'm going to find a way over to the Director of Operations. And because I came on this non-traditional path, I had to sort of internally apply to do the training, to do the operational training, to do other things. And I remember my boss to this day, I won't say his name here, but he said, well, we don't have anybody else to send to the training. Therefore, we're going to send you, but we think you'll fail. Right? We think you'll fail. So fast forward half a year, I didn't fail. I came back and they said, okay, now there's additional training in language to go overseas, right? After I was within the Director of Operations. And they said, we're going to put you through this language course for a year. We don't think you'll pass. And so at the time, I was working for one of the centers within the Director of Operations. And I did pass and I did deploy. And one of the geographical regions came to me and said, why are you working for that center? Right? You should be working for us. And I had no allegiance to the center at the time. And I switched. And so I became this Eurasia focused person within Eastern Europe, South and Central Asia. And that's history. That's how I got there. But there was no I didn't get appointed or you shall be a case officer. It actually was a very difficult path.
So maybe I should have rephrased that question instead of, what made you this perfect candidate? It should have been like, well, what was the path you had to take to show that you are? I don't think there is a perfect candidate, by the way.
There is.
You had to take this path to show, hey, I'm what you're looking for, guys. I might not be what you expected, but I'm what you're looking for. I can do the job. So I think that's a very interesting path.
I mean, and if you really look at the successful people that have been case officers, operations officers, case officers, actually an older word for it, they come from very different paths. People are zoologists, they're accountants, they're sports. I knew a guy that played for the NFL, right? He became a very good case officer. And so it's not reflective of what you studied in college or what your previous experience was, because I always say this, go tell me the class that teaches you how to do this. Go tell me the profession that you can take that prepares you to do this. There isn't. It just doesn't exist. And so, the CIA, as well as other intelligence agencies, they try to put it into a can and come up with psychological testing or different attributes that they think make you a good CO. But there's never a reflection when you get out and say, okay, we're going to go back and look at that psychological assessment and see how we assessed you and how you turned out and learn from that. They don't do that.
Right.
They use the same tired psychological assessments from like the 50s.
Rorschach test?
Yeah, no, it wasn't like splotches and things like that.
I had to do a Rorschach test for Israeli military intelligence, and I was like, really?
Yeah,
people
what do
still
you
do
see
this?
here? Interpret this. No, it was more like, how do you process information? Are you extroverted? Are you introverted? How do you get your energy sources, right? Are you judgmental? Are you sensing? And then they put you in a category to suggest whether you would be good in the field of operations or bad?
Well, as you know, I did my master's in security intelligence in the US, and we had professors who were former CIA, and we had the CIA actively recruiting in our program. But they said, we are recruiting for analysts. That's what they said, which made sense because of what we were studying. But like you pointed out, there's no real academic program to prepare you to be a case officer. And our professors were saying, one of you in this program might very well be set up to be a case officer. That's going to be about you and many other factors. It's not going to be about what we teach you in this program.
Right.
So that was interesting. Yeah.
It's very true. And there's a lot of debate within CIA and other places that once you're categorized as something, right? Support, analyst, operations, even within the director of operations, there's many just different jobs. Should you be able to explore that opportunity if they've misclassified you, right? So you come in as an analyst and your heart's in staff operations or being an operations officer, can you switch? And there's a pendulum that swings back and forth. Some people, sometimes the gateway's open, sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. And are you going to base your entire career, whether that's 20 plus years with retirement, on maybe you can get to what you want to do or not, right? So some people just don't like it. They come in, they're like, this isn't for me, and they move on, which is kind of a travesty because of the time and the expense the government has spent on you just to get you to that point.
Right, that's a good point. So let's talk about what is the psychological makeup of a case officer? In other words, what kind of mindset is required to operate successfully as a case officer in the CIA?
That's a wonderful question. And I thought I have this on my other monitor here. I brought up the CIA's own website on the case officer qualifications, right?
Yeah.
And so the traditional stuff that I think is in any government field is, the bachelor's degree, 3.0 GPA. Let's look at some of the other ones. Personal integrity, strong interpersonal and communication skills, verbal and written, action and results oriented, okay? Ability to work effectively as part of a team and independently, and flexibility, adaptability, commitment to mission, et cetera, right? And so
that's like any job.
Yeah, well, this is the standard, right? But let's read about how the agency itself describes case officers, right? As a case officer of CIA, you will focus on clandestinely spotting, assessing, developing, recruiting, and handling non-U.S. citizens with access to foreign intelligence vital to the United States, et cetera. You will be expected to build relationships based on rapport and trust, using sound judgment, integrity, and the ability to assess character and motivation, right? All right. And I'm good. And this is said somewhat half jokingly. The definition of a sociopath. People with the condition might seem charming and charismatic at first, at least on the surface, but they generally find it difficult to understand other people's feelings. They often break rules and laws, behave aggressively or impulsively, feel little guilt or harm they cause to others, use manipulation, deceit, and controlling behavior. Do you see potentially how a bad actor within the case officer field is a borderline sociopath, right? I mean, like,
but the sociopath doesn't necessarily understand internally what somebody else is going through. And I think a case officer has to have very deep empathy to put their head in the mindset of someone else and to see, whether they're being honest or not, whether,
let me ask
the way you're maneuvering them work. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question on that then.
Yeah.
If your whole career is based on, let's say, the operations officer profession, and you are judged, your performance is judged on that. Keep in mind, this is what the agency's own website says: spot, assess, recruit, right? So what do you think the performance metrics for your job would be? Spot, assess, recruit. All right. And so let's just talk about an unscrupulous person. And
Yeah.
let's compare it to, I'm just going to compare it to a car salesman, and people hate that analogy, but I'm going to do it anyways. So your manager at your car dealership is going to go to you at the end of each month and say, how many cars did you sell? Right? And if your answer is like none, one or two, or some low number, how long do you think you're going to be in that profession for? Right? And so let's say your national pride, your patriotism brought you to the agency, right? And then that veneer, that shine is kind of worn off, and you're stuck in that position. Where's your integrity? Where's your morality? Where's your ethos, your ethics? You hope you still have it, right? And now multiply that by a 20 or 30-year career. Is it being chipped away every time, every month, every time your friends get promoted but you don't because they're backstabbing, or that they're trying to climb to the top of the ladder, right? Where you just want to be, say, a good a good operations officer who likes the science and the art of it, right? These are all things that go through you when you're in this business, right? And again, this business is based on personal trust and integrity. In other words, nobody else is there. It's just you, right? Your written word is what you said happened, right? Can you imagine scenarios like, oh, I didn't get promoted, I can't live, I can't afford my 3 kids or whatever. Do you bend rules, break, do you take advantage of the situation for yourself?
Well, there's a lot of gray area. And
Yeah,
I think
it's
you
all,
can
it's 96% gray, right? Like
96% gray.
2%
Yeah, that makes
white,
sense.
2% black. That's it.
Yeah, and of course, like I said before, I think the empathy thing is important, but it's not that simple, because also you might be doing things that are morally questionable. I think that is a huge gray area, and people both in the military and the intelligence world, can suffer from moral injury. It's actually something that Rand was talking about recently. A CIA officer was talking about it at Rand, and that can cause, I imagine, all kinds of psychological issues. So
That's
that's it.
just the beginning. Yeah.
It's just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface. But that's a great segue to my next question, which is, case officers face all kinds of challenging situations, not just physically, but also morally, including a lot of those gray areas, right, that we just started to talk about. So what kind of mental gymnastics do you need to do in order to continue working effectively as a case officer?
It's a great question. You have to have whatever that motivation that got you there, right? That said, I want to, and look at the requirements for director of operations again. 80% of the time living overseas, an ethos, patriotism, all these things. Do you have enough of that to last your entire career, right? How, to say that, for the next 20 years, I can do this job. Keep in mind, what is the job? Spot, assess, recruit, right? Turnover, right? Spot, assess, recruit, right? This is a human interaction. You're dealing with humans. You're not dealing with AI. You're not dealing with tech. You're dealing with humans. Do you have enough of whatever you came in with to last your entire career, right? And what you hope, for me personally, right? What did I hope? I hoped whatever I did that the apparatus of the United States government used it, right? They used my information. They used what I was out there doing to create better policy or to create a better understanding of whatever situation that may be. But the other thing I really hope for is they never politicized it. There was no political agenda, and then they're just taking data points to put in that political agenda to say, well, look, obviously country X is doing this, this, and this. And so what they're doing is effectively cherry picking information to get whatever political agenda out there. And you just hope, right, that you're doing it for the right reasons. Whether that's as an American in CIA or Israeli Mossad or Russians or whoever it may be, right? That you hope that you're doing your job and people are effectively utilizing the information that you provide and not manipulating it. And so if you have those ground rules, if you have that stuff, right, then you can justify your actions, right? So some of your actions are morally questionable, right? I'll use the M word, right? Manipulation. Do you manipulate people? Right? I hated manipulation, right? Oh, you got to convince people, you need to manipulate them. And I was like, no, I don't. I don't need to do that. I need to just show them, right? In my personal opinion, what's better for them. People should be like eyes wide open in this field, right? Whether you're an operations officer or you're an agent, right? An agent is someone that an operations officer recruits, not a special agent like the FBI. And that, like, they should make the decisions. You shouldn't be like blackmailing or coercing or strong arming people into these type of relationships. And you shouldn't be like, oh, I left out all this information that's really pertinent to you, but I need the recruitment, therefore I'm not going to tell you, right?
So you don't think blackmailing people is effective?
Well, let me tell you, let me ask you a question. If I blackmailed you, right, and then I got to meet you like 6 times a year, do you want to go to that meeting? Right?
I wouldn't like you. I would not like you, but I might feel compelled to do what you asked me to do.
Think about it in this case, right? But like, now what's your veracity? Do I trust your information? Or are you just trying to get out of a deal, right? And so there's a great analogy, which is the jailhouse snitch, right? A snitch on your cellmate, and you get something, right? And so if a prosecutor says, hey, if you snitch on your cellmate, we'll reduce your sentence by 10 years, right? If you uncover information that they're smuggling weapons or something into the jail. What do you think the result of that is going to be? Your source, your jailhouse snitch, is going to say, he was smuggling, or she was smuggling weapons into the jail, right?
So then you have to question the veracity of the information. So
right.
There are all different kinds of scenarios. And I'm sure there are times when you might have to blackmail somebody, but it sounds like you would want that to be a more short-term relationship, because that can be a very iffy relationship, especially with the veracity of information. Yeah.
Turn a negative into a positive. Why is it blackmail, right? Like, hey, I got your wife and kids locked up in a room, or they're going to go to jail if you don't do this. Why don't you incentivize people to do, so that they feel wanted and are a contributor to whatever you're doing, the information and stuff. There's a great old book, a Soviet book called Inside Soviet Military Intelligence. And it talks about the Russian military intelligence called GRU, right? They've been in the news. They're all over the place. And it was a defector with a pseudonym, Viktor Sukhotov, who wrote it. And he said, whatever your problems are, the GRU works to make them worse, right? To make them worse. And then they'll come in and fix it for you, right? So they're like your savior at the end of this, right? Where they come in and say, oh, you have money problems. Yeah, because we turned off your power. We doubled your electrical bill. Now we're going to come in and give you money, but you work for us, right? That's a manipulation. That's a blackmail or coercion manipulation. Would you want to be in that relationship or not?
I might choose it over other relationships.
Well, I mean, think about it in personal relationships.
Yeah.
Do you want to be with a manipulative partner that uses blackmail and coercion to keep you together? Like, it's the same. It's exactly the same as personal relationships. My particular answer would be, yeah, I don't really want that.
Right. No, that makes sense. And also to just have to question the veracity of that relationship, to question, if they're going to be finding an exit, quickly. Yeah. Exactly. So obviously that's not ideal. And people at the end of the day do not want to be controlled. People of all different backgrounds, personalities, they will eventually rebel against that, I believe.
Right. And think about it this way too, that let's say I was blackmailing someone to provide information for me. And let's say another service found out about that and said, hey, we're the good guys. We're going to save you from this. Continue to meet that guy, but tell us what he's saying. So this is a freedom from hostile control, right? Like, so now this person is being controlled by another service. And so you hear terms like double agent, right? Like, Now this person is a double agent. And actually, effectively, now information can be fed to you, right? Whatever the other country wants you to think they're doing. And so this all started because you blackmailed somebody.
Right.
And this is the difference between professional intelligence services and, say, the local police, right? Or maybe not the FBI, right? Like, so, because keep in mind, FBI works for the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice puts people in jail. So are they going to cut deals with people to be sources?
Right.
To stay out of jail, right? So that's a coercion technique. And, it's very old school. The FBI used to teach that in the 50s.
So tell me about some of the psychological challenges you've faced as a case officer. Tell me a story.
Yeah, so this one may be more of a benign story, but it's still a story. I always say this, like, if you're not a natural extrovert, in other words, you can be an extrovert because of your job, but then in other places you're introverted, you basically have a bucket of energy, right? And so if you spend and you want to be good at your job as a case officer, you expend a lot of that bucket of energy every day, right? So what does that make you at the dinner party, right? Or your wife or husband's friends' parties, right? It makes you the most boring person in the world, right? And so, like, I used to go to a lot of dinner parties with my wife's friends and stuff after work or on weekends. And you literally break it down like this. Wow, there's no interesting targets here, right? Like, there's nobody I want to recruit. Therefore, that I'm going to keep the energy in the bucket, and I'm going to just sit here and do nothing, right? And so the whole world, as much as you operate in the gray, the whole world becomes black and white to you. Is this interesting? Is this going to further me somehow, right? Or is it just noise? And so, you become this person, like, you just want to store your energy so that when you go back to the job, you're doing this job, right? But the other sort of important aspect of it is if you choose manipulation, if you choose coercion tricks, other things that help you in your day job, do you turn them off when you're dealing with your wife's friends or not? Right? And
yeah,
so, after I retired, people, my wife's friends were like, you can't, there's no way you can manipulate me, right? And I was like, so now you become this, like, party trick, right? And I was like, okay, by the end of the party, I'm going to tell you how I manipulate you, right? And so inevitably the person comes at the end of the party and says, well, what did you do? You never did anything. And I was like, you went to high school here, you got a degree in this, your friends are this, you have access to this information, right? In 12th grade, you told your best friend, etc., right? You told me all this stuff over the course of a few hours. Did I manipulate you? Did you realize that this was happening? And so they're like, holy crap, like, I didn't even know that you could do that. So you become this, like, weird party trick for people. And it's like you're just kind of showing off, like, well, I guess you could manipulate people if you really wanted to. But,
you should be hired, like, out for kids parties.
Right,
this could be your second career.
Right. Here's a former CIA guy who's going to manipulate your kids. But the thing is like in situ, like when you're doing all this stuff, and you're busy, it doesn't take a toll. You're like, oh, as a firefighter, like, good firefighters could eat a sandwich on a triple fatality car accident and have absolutely no remorse or feelings during that time. But again, it's a delayed response. And so what happens is, over time,
interesting.
And now that you're not as busy, you start thinking about, like, was that the best use of my time for 10 years, right? Was that the best use of my efforts? Look, I used to meet all these former agency guys, right? And I was like, what did you do with your lives, right? And so in some way, shape, or form, they're still working for the government. And why are they still working for the government? Because they had nothing else. During the course of their 30 years career, they got divorced and married 3 times. The kids have, they didn't take care of their kids, or the kids are grown and they separated from them and they don't keep in touch. And so the only thing they have left is the job that put them there in the first place, right? And so they don't know how to transition to something else. And I learned that very early on in my career. And I was like, I never want to be these people, right? There has to be this escape valve somewhere. There has to be something else that makes you get up in the morning, except going and recruiting people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hearing like several different psychological challenges. So I want to break that down. I think one is the energy reserve. I interviewed somebody else from the CIA. His name is Peter Warmka, and he said, yeah, I'm naturally an introvert. You wouldn't know that seeing me in operation at a party, like, with the crowd. He said, I seem like the ultimate extrovert. He said that is a show, and I feel really drained afterwards. So I think that's one thing, is that, figuring out how to maintain those energy reserves, especially when you have to go back to your personal life and you still want to be a good spouse, a good father, and so on. The second issue you brought up, which I thought was really interesting, was that, when you're trained to read body language, micro expressions, for the sake of your job, it can be very hard to turn that off. And I haven't finished it yet. I'm in the middle of reading a memoir by a former member of Shin Bet. And he's saying that this was actually a real challenge for him, because he was trained to read, body language in this very intense way. And his wife would have a dinner party and he'd be, looking at all the friends around the table and reading all these things. And he realized that's wrong, and he would have to like turn away. So yeah. And then the third issue is like, if all of your, your meaning in life is connected to your job. And I don't think this is just an issue for an officer in the CIA. I hear this from people, from the military, from police officers. This is your meaning. Becomes part of your identity, and you're afraid to leave, because who are you after that, right? So if you don't have a good balance, if you don't have a healthy home life, meaningful relationships with family, with friends, which can be very hard if you're hiding half of your life and people don't know what you do for a living. But eventually you want to come back to something meaningful where you feel like people know you. And I think that is a huge challenge. I have no idea how I would navigate that challenge.
Well, I think of it this way too, Jessica. Like, let's say you were you had a really good, whether that's marriage or you're dating somebody and you trusted somebody explicitly and you told them all your feelings and all that fun stuff, right? And let's say you're stationed overseas in like a hostile environment. Are you really going to sit in the living room and tell your significant partner like your war stories or what you're going through at work? Because what's the danger, right? It's not just Alexa listening to you, right? It's potentially the foreign security service or the internal security service there listening to you. And so what you learn to do, what you program to do, is you're like, I'm just going to keep it all to, in myself, right? And like, what happens, what happens if that relationship then goes south? And they said, well, I'm going to drop dime on James because he told me X, Y, and Z. And so you learn not to trust people, right? And so like my 20-year career within the agency, I have 6 people that I call today. Out of all the people that I met, the thousands of people that I met, I trust 6 people.
At least you have that.
Right. And that's implicit trust. Like I trust them with my life. I trust them with information. Right. 4 are American. 2 are not. Right. And so like, it doesn't necessarily mean I only trust Americans, or like there are good people out there. And I've put all my trust in those 6 people. Everybody else in Russian, it's not call me, right? They're just acquaintances. Like I say hi to them, but I don't keep in touch with them.
Look, I think that's a deep human need, to have like real friends, not just acquaintances. And but to have deeper friendships, people have to know you, and that can be difficult in your situation.
It becomes a liability. Oh, I'm going to tell you my weakness. Well, remember the manipulation, exploitation aspect of this.
Yeah.
Some foreign service can exploit that weakness, right? But you got to own it. Like, and so there's 2 ways to deal with it. One is I'm going to put it so deep down and no one's ever going to find it in a million years. How about the other one? I'm going to expose it. so it cannot be used as liability, right? What we're doing, this podcast, and social media, these things like that, this is frowned upon in many circles within intelligence, right? How dare you come out there and talk about this stuff, right? But it's like, it's not 1955, it's 2023. It's different, right? And like, okay, are you going to manipulate me? My life's out there. You can go look at it. Have fun at it, right? What do I have to hide? It's, I retired. I'm doing my own thing. That's it.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And I don't know how many people come to that conclusion, right? So based on your personal experience, sorry, I'm slightly nearsighted and not wearing glasses. Well, based on your personal experience, what would you say were some of the immediate versus long-term effects on your mental well-being? And did the agency, sorry, it's a bit of a two-part question, and did the agency in any way prepare you or provide you with beneficial mental health support?
So like long-term effects would be just the degradation of the person you came in as, right? And so like I would see videos sometimes and people that recorded me back in 2002, right? And I don't recognize the person that I was, right? I don't know who that person is, right? And like I was like, I would never share that information today. And so like you know what the number one thing is? You're just kind of lonely, right? You're just like, you've bottled and suppressed so much stuff for so many years. Like if people offered you a lifeline, you wouldn't even know how to take it, right? You wouldn't know. It's all in your head. Again, the mental gymnastics, like you're playing things in your head. You're constantly trying to solve problems on your own. You don't share, you don't open up. And so how does that affect, like I'm a Gen Xer, right? So even mental health was like a bad name for Gen Xer. How about like Gen, what are they called? Alphas, Gen Z now, who they've grown up on sharing information on social media and things like that. How does it affect you that you are in a citadel yourself and you cannot share anything with anybody, right? And so how does that affect you for a minute or a day or a year or maybe a career? And so over time, what happens is you become this shell of who you used to be, right? And so unless you have, this goes back to your other question, unless you have an outlet for something else that's constant. I'm a commercial photographer, right? Like I only learned that later in my career, but like that's my outlet. That's the stuff I want to do. That has nothing to do with work. If you don't have that and your job consumes you, well, then you're done, right? You're not going to get out of this. You're going to be, I don't know what you're going to be. You're going to be an angry old person, like, or maybe an angry.
Well, how do you deal with the loneliness? Because if you're operating alone in certain cases, maybe long periods of time, or just the general, situation of not being able to share your, profession with people who are close to you, to hold back so much. I mean, that loneliness can be really crushing. I mean, that's something, I don't know, if you don't have the mental resources. Well, so how do you deal with that? Like, especially long term?
Well, combine the loneliness with I never mentioned, but like most case officers are adrenaline junkies, right? And so, they're parachutists or, they've done all these other interesting things, but they feed on adrenaline. And so you have loneliness in adrenaline. So and you're bored, right? So what do? Well, you instigate, right? You cause problems. You strike up conversations just to defend your position.
Pick up skydiving. Yeah.
I mean, but like if you're in the human interaction, like I don't think I can have a normal political discussion. It's either you're on the offense or you're on the defense, and it's not like it's like a zero-sum game to you, right? And so these are things that just they're career-based and they're personality-based, but like you become very efficient person in human interactions, right? But efficiency should never be in the discussion with human interaction, because human interactions are not efficient, right? They're personable, they're nice. How was your day? hello, thank you very much, right? If it's just like ones and zeros and binary code crap, right? People are going to have the worst discussions in the world. And so in this career, you just kind of take away all the fluff and you get down to brass tacks and you just want to talk about things that are interesting. If you continue that stuff, first of all, people don't want to talk to you because you're boring. But and you're single track minded. And so unless you do something else, you have something else, whether that's faith, a serious drug or alcohol problem, family, the things that make other people tick, you need that like in spades to overcome some of the issues that you see. That's just my opinion, but that's I think that's what I've seen for the most part.
Yeah, that's quite a balancing act. Yeah, go
your
ahead.
Second question too, the resources, right? And so you can't go 5 minutes in the agency without somebody reaching out and providing mental health resources or whatever that may be. It's a government agency like any other government agency. And I would say the CIA takes it very to heart that they need to offer these services. And so I have nothing bad to say about their services. The only thing I can say is the services are offered by a different part of the agency than the Office of Security, right? And the reason that I say that is because in me personally, I don't have inside information on this, but personally, I think if you were to go and get those services, it would adversely affect your career in some way, shape, or fashion, right? Maybe not on paper, but maybe in people's heads, right? Oh, well, James sought help. He did this, right? And so it's like this scuttlebutt in the hall, like, like, oh, there's nothing on paper, but, he's taking antidepressant medications and things like that. And so I'm sure the agency will let you keep your job. But if you were hired as a fighter pilot or a race car driver, and they said, you can go work the pit somewhere, is that really what you wanted to do? Granted, you got the mental health, you got all this stuff, but now you're actually stigmatized because they put you in some job that you didn't sign up for, right? And so the unintended results of doing good things, right? And you can even come out there and say, we don't do any of that. The agency come out and say, we don't do any of that stuff. And you're like, well, you're a professional liar, right? That's, right. You're an intelligence.
I mean, so how many people do you think, and you don't have to go too specific, but I mean, how many people do you think actually say, yeah, I'm having a little PTSD, I'm struggling with alcoholism, which I've heard unofficially is an issue as well in the CIA, or people whose parents were alcoholics, interestingly.
Well, how about this, Jessica? Your asset was killed. And it's
right, somebody you were close to.
Like, think about it. Like, someone put their trust in your hands and your asset died, right? How do you react to that? And so to answer your question, I would not give specifics, but I would say it's generational, right? So baby boomer, Gen X, millennials, whatever, they each approach that answer differently, right? And so to go out and seek mental health if you're 23 years old today, I would just think that's a foregone conclusion, and you do that. And so either the structure and the apparatus of, say, Office of Security at CIA, they need to change to keep up with the times, to say this is not what it used to be, or the perception or the stigma of this is not what it used to be. Therefore, we can't hold, penalty points against you for doing this. And I think those are the type of issues that solve themselves, because those people will hold on for a long time, but they'll ultimately retire. And then more like-minded people will fill those roles and say, you know what, we can't do this anymore. We cannot use the standards of 1953 to hire people in 2023, right? They just can't do that. But it's a slow governmental bureaucracy process. And to get it updated takes generations. It doesn't take years.
But in your generation, how many people estimated?
In Gen X?
Do you think we're actually taking the CA up on their offer for mental health because the risk? Yeah.
Baby boomer, Gen X, zero, right? I'd say if you were born in like the mid 80s and later, okay, now you start seeing people maybe do that stuff. My generation, and this is from personal experience, none. I have not seen anyone. And so I have secondhand information about some people that went there. And again, whether that's credible sources or not, their careers were adversely affected by doing that, right? And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I used to mentor a lot of new people, and if that question came up, I would say, I don't know the answer, right? Right, and so, and if you like, I wouldn't even say, go way far away. Let's say you want to go see a psychiatrist, psychologist. I'd be like, go to like a different country or like California or something, right? Like just somewhere real far away. I would never use any person that the government recommended, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, here's our psychiatrist. Like,
I mean, what can I say? I understand it from both sides. And
so
again,
do I.
I'm
So do I.
like the intelligence world, law enforcement, and so on. Like if I just put myself in the place of the agency or the therapist who has to make an assessment, say, wow, you just lost, an asset that you were close to. You use that as an example. And then it's like, yeah, I think you were in a really bad place. I don't want you to have a gun for your own safety, for other,
Correct.
and it's like, but now the person feels kind of screwed because it's like, well, I just confided in you and now my entire career is going to be downgraded. I don't know what the answer to that is either. I've spoken to a lot of people from different parts of the security field about it. I don't know. So yeah,
Yep.
it's a very tough call.
And
Yeah.
think so personal bias, someone is making a human decision, right? Whether to give that person a gun or not. And if there's any hints of the office or the person have being biased, right? And they adversely affect you, what's your natural reaction? This person is biased, right? And so I'm not even talking about like gender bias or male, female, like all these biases come in there, right? I'm even talking about bias like they work for this office or this office. And so and inevitably 50% of the decisions these people make are going to be wrong according to the patients they have. How do you deal with that? And so if you're all about your career, remember the whole alpha personality thing, I'm not going to go see any of those people, right? I'm going to meet the psychologist, now an interesting person at the party, or a psychiatrist at my wife's birthday party or something, and I'm going to pull them aside, right? And I'm going to say, hey, I got this situation, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be off the books. No one's ever going to know about it. And you know what? I jested not, but it's wrong. But that's what I'm going to do.
So let's take a step back to the mental health preparation when you first come into your job, right? Is the agency mentally preparing you in any way? Is there any kind of mental health preparation? To give a specific example, I say, hey, you might come into some very horrific scenes. You might start to have symptoms of PTSD as a result. Hey, this is what PTSD looks like. These are your options to get treatment. Like very straightforward. Did you get anything like that, in your initial training?
So I would have to dissect that a little bit into,
Sure.
let's say you're going into active war zone, right? And so the answer, if you were going to an active war zone, would be absolutely, right? Absolutely, panic button, the reach out numbers, everything that you get, right? That say, if you have these experiences, and now this is probably within the last 10 years, right? Absolutely, here's outreach, here's a number you can call. For traditional type stuff, traditional tours, no, right? And you're dealing with it. Basically, you're using that energy jar again, but you're using your past experience jar of, can I deal with this or not? Right. So I was a firefighter. I actually got PTSD from being a firefighter. And so I just saw too many people die in too many car accidents, and it just adversely affected me 6 months later.
I bet.
Which, by the way, I had to then justify to get into the agency. Like that, that's again a little mental health issue there. But like when the situation got very tough for me being a case officer, I actually just went back to being a firefighter, right? And say, well, how did I handle these situations on the road or in a burning house or a child, injured or killed. How did I handle it there? And you just basically put up walls, right? And so you're able to deal with this stuff. We used to have a term in firefighting, which is don't get tunnel vision, right? Or don't get the bell shits, right? The bell goes off and you're like, and your world becomes singularly focused to what's right in front of your eyes. And if you put yourself in enough stressful situations, you're able to expand that circle greatly and see this sort of peripheral vision of what the world is like. And that's only experience, Jessica, right? That's only, and you can come from, let's say you were special forces, let's say you were an ER doctor, a social worker that dealt with very high stress situations. Whatever those sources of power are that you brought in, that's what you need to go back to.
Right. So there are things that can be taught and things that you have to teach yourself from experience.
Yeah, it's like writing a job ad for this job. It's like, where do you get, like, one of the first books I actually read was Sources of Power, right? How do people, fire chiefs and fighter pilots and special operators and airline pilots and people like that, where do they generate their power from to make them get through these highly stressful situations?
Who is the author of this book?
Oh, I forgot the book, but I think I told it to you like in a pre-interview.
Is this Robert Greene? I'm reading Robert Greene. It is Robert Greene.
Yep.
I love Robert Greene. I'm reading one of his books now, a newer book called The Laws of Human Nature. That's a whole other conversation, but it does talk about not just reading other people, reading what's going on in society, but also reading yourself. And I think, like you're pointing out, having self-awareness, having internal resources that you develop, nobody can take that away from you. And that might be the key to mental health and survival for some people.
Oh, absolutely. And then another book, The 48 Rules of Power.
I love that one too. Yeah. We got to do a book club.
Yeah, we can relate to that one as well. And I love the historical examples in there, and they do have some relation to this intelligence world. And but they're very aggressive. I don't know if I would always do what it says in that book.
They also have the laws of seduction, which is very interesting. And the historical examples are very interesting. Yeah, we could talk about, that could be another episode. We just talk about Robert Greene.
No, I mean, but then, there's a lot of people that said, oh, hey, I work for the CIA and I wrote a book on manipulation techniques or seduction, right? And then if you dig down, the person was in the printing shop or something. And it's like the modern clickbait, right? It's just, oh, CIA officer, therefore I'm going to read this book. And it's complete garbage, right? I don't know any more about UFOs than the average person, right? There's no UFO in the basement of some building that I'm not telling you about. I'm not part of any deep state. This is just me.
Too bad, man. I was excited to hear about the UFOs. So, are there effective ways to maintain mental health while working in a challenging environment long term? We started to talk about that, about the internal resources, but let's talk about specifics and if there are any story examples you can give to illustrate that.
I think I mentioned it previously, but find your outlet, right? If it's I had a boss, he had 8 kids, right? And his outlet, how you do that overseas, I have no idea. But his outlet was taking time off and being with those children. And so he was also very religious. And so his faith was the outlet. Whether it's hanging out with friends. Now that's a slippery slope because that kind of involves drinking a lot of times. Other people's was drinking and socializing, right? Womanizing, literally a hobby, but they do it, right? It's still an outlet. I'm saying that half jokingly, but it's still an outlet. Whatever the outlet is, that's not spying, that's not doing intelligence work, do it. And so what's a very portable outlet for me? It was I could bring my camera everywhere, right? So I brought, and that's how I became a commercial photographer. I just started taking a lot of pictures, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you can bring it to wherever you're going, Central Asia or Europe or South America, you name it. And there's beautiful scenery and you can do things like that. And when you edit the pictures, just like you edit this podcast, Lightroom takes a lot of time. And so you can immerse yourself in something that's not, and it's benign. Nobody can accuse you of like, you're editing secret information in Adobe Lightroom. Really? No, I'm not. Now they could probably say, oh, photography is your cover, right? It's your cover, and that's why. But yeah, you can play that game all you want. I had this funny situation once where a foreign security service came to me because I think I was the chief at the time, and they said, your spies are running amok around our capital city, and they like they're planning dead drops, and I was like, what? There's a lot of paranoia, especially in sort of like former Soviet countries, about what the CIA is and it is not capable of. It turns out it was geotaggers. It was
what?
guys, these geotaggers,
I don't know what that is. What's a geotagger?
So apparently throughout the world, they put emplacements or dead drops, which is like a USB stick, right? And they put it under park benches, they put it in wood logs and things like that. And there's maps, and you have to sort of go and collect what's off the USB, and then you share it amongst your group. Well, what does that look like to a foreign intelligence service? It looks like dead drops. It looks like you're communicating with agents. But it turns out it was just like a bunch of 23-year-old geocachers that happened to come through this capital city.
Oh, and that wasn't even, they were not part of your agency.
No,
I guess I missed that part.
Yeah,
okay, they
were
had nothing to do with you.
Just some geotaggers, like,
cool.
And I was like, and so that happens a lot.
Right.
And so, they think that they attribute lots of things to you that have nothing to do with you, right? But maybe that was somebody's outlet to deal with the stress of the job. None of our people were in it, but overseas they have running clubs a lot. Whatever that is, do it. And don't keep up with the Joneses, right? And so because you're an alpha personality in this job, when your friends get promoted, when your friends do recruitments, right, inevitably it makes you question your ability to do your job, right? And so I remember I went through the training and I was like, yes, I can do this. And then I thought to myself for a second, I was like, who the hell is ever going to trust me enough to allow me to recruit them, right? And so, and I was like, well, I went through the training so I can sit on my rocking chair when I retire and say, at least I made it this far, right? And then you end up recruiting people. And you're like, oh, wow, I have no idea how that happened. And then you get harder people, right? And so you're constantly upping the game. And so you build the confidence that you can do that stuff. And so are you stressed that you're not getting promoted and everyone gets a trophy, then therefore you should get promoted? Or are you doing things to better yourself to do your job? But I would contend that if all you're doing is your job, you get really bad at your job, right? You become obsessed with it, and obsession is never good. Like if you're obsessed with somebody else in a personal relationship, how well does that work out? And so it's the same in development of people. If you become obsessed, and you just start grabbing anybody off the streets and being like, do you have access to information? It would be really bad. Keep in mind, we never talked about counterintelligence, but the counterintelligence people would be all over you because you would be really bad. Be like, who is this moronic?
Right, you can't be desperate.
Yeah. Who is this moronic person? We're going to throw them out of our country because they're acting like morons, right? And so,
but if you're such a big moron, maybe they figure that's no way that guy's a CIA officer. He can't be CIA.
Hiding in plain sight defense. I love this one, right? But the other one is, it's like, keep in mind that you talked about psychological manifestations, like of things that could go wrong, or how you deal with them. People take an interest in what you do, right? So foreign governments take an interest in what you do. How does that manifest itself? Well, they like to surveil you. And so I don't know about your life, but, most people around the world have never been under surveillance. They don't know what it feels like. And so how do you deal with it if you're trained to detect it? Right. Now you're
Yeah.
right. And then where does it end? And so I know this story of a person, and they were in a very large city, trained, and they thought everybody was surveillance. It's called seeing ghosts, right? So they were seeing ghosts everywhere. And it wasn't, it was just random people. And what happened was there was a mental episode in this person's mind that they got to this point, right? And so how do you bring them back? Right? Everybody's not surveillance, right? The 4-year-old kid on the street is not part of this elaborate conspiracy to follow you, right? And so you have to really be careful in those situations that you are assessing people's mental capacity to do this job in high stress areas. And if you don't, then you can break somebody. These stories, you know, with SEER school, right? Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. It's special forces, helicopter pilots, military guys that are in these jobs where they could be captured have to take this job. And at the end of that school, and this is not secret, right? At the end of that school, they repatriate you. It's a 17-day course. They repatriate you and try to bring you back from this simulation to reality. And I have talked to people that have run this course that said people have derailed their careers because they cannot be brought back from a simulation.
Interesting.
17
days, you said.
17 days, right? And they told me this one story about a helicopter pilot, captain in the Army. And they tried to introduce his captor instructors, which are Army personnel, mind you, right? And he chokeholded them. He went after him, and they had to break them up. And despite their best efforts to repatriate this individual, he ended up washing out of the Army because he could never. He had a mental break, and they couldn't get him back. Right? The Army's been doing this. The military's been doing this school for 50 years, and they are the best at hostage detention situations, etc. And they couldn't bring him back. So you have to be careful, right? And that you don't get to this mental break thing. And like the best advice I could give anybody, right? Like how do you deal with it? How do you get out, right? It's like if you do your career to your ethical standards, your ethos, your pace and capacity, and when you're retired, you can sit on a rocking chair and tell your grandkids, you know, war stories about what you did, and you feel proud of it. That should be good enough, right? Right? And like I have nothing else to prove, right? People are like, I could have stayed in 15 more years, and I was like, what else do I have to prove, right? I don't want to be 65 years old in CIA and like just talking about when I was 30 and what I was doing. It's just ridiculous. And so you have to come up with that game plan at the end of your career to say, I always said this for younger officers, what does success look like in your life? Like, oh, I want to be happy. Nah, well, okay, well, that's sort of generic.
Nobody knows what that actually means. And the pursuit of happiness does not result in happiness.
Right. What does success look like to you? And you need to clearly articulate what that is. And that becomes your ethos, right? And you should work towards that. And trust me, there'll be bumps and bruises along the way. People will get promoted. Bosses will hate you. I mean, I hated 60% of my bosses, 60%. Like to this day, I'd punch him in the face.
Do I need to censor this in the final?
No, you do not need to censor this, right? But I love the 40%, right?
Yeah.
I love the 40% of them because I did not agree with their personal ethos, right? And they were playing games.
Yeah.
Well, what's the number one rule of being a case officer? Don't case officer another case officer, right? The second you try to case officer me is the second I lose respect for you, because you did not give me credit that I didn't see you coming from a mile away, right? And then the other one is like, if you ever want to tell somebody bad news, we have this term, the sandwich approach. I don't know if you've ever heard it, Jessica.
The shit sandwich.
The shit sandwich, right? Tell them how much you respect them. Tell them what a piece of crap they are, and then tell them you're looking forward to working together again in the future. And right, like that's and but, you think if I saw 5,000 of these telegrams, these cables in my career that I couldn't tell exactly what you're doing, right? And then keep in mind who's writing that. Somebody that has 1 year experience, right? Or less. And so
Yeah.
you want to go through the phone line or go through the computer line and rip the head off that person that did that stuff because you did not respect the person enough to just give it to you like it is, right? And so there's all kinds of ways that we deal with this. I can't even tell you what they are. But if a random person saw this from the outside, they would say, this is the most dysfunctional organization on the face of the earth, right? It's platitudes of bullshit. Platitude, right? And unfortunately, that's the bad side of this career, right? It's the unscrupulous people. But like, if you have that personal ethos and you're like, I'm doing it for mission, I'm doing it for the United States, I'm doing it for these reasons, and that can persevere, you win, right? You win your mental health at the end of this. That's what you win.
Yeah.
Wow. And what you realize is you look back on all the stuff and say, wow, that was super trivial, right? That was, that's in many aspects of life, but especially in this part. That was super trivial. Why did I lose sleep over that?
All these things you're saying, I know you're talking about a very unique profession, but there's so many universal truths. I'm thinking about Gen Zers. Obviously, my platform is mostly, at least for now, other security professionals, but I also have a growing audience of Gen Zers. I speak to them as well at my company. And I think these are just really important, like, life lessons about how to operate, to function in the workplace. I mean, look, Robert Greene also talks about it in his latest book, the Laws of Human Nature, that if people were constantly blunt, like if people said everything that was on their mind, right? And like my little kids do that, and sometimes I'm like, no, don't say that in public. Like you're not going to be likable. You're going to have problems. So, whether we admit it or not, we're all actors. Shakespeare says it as well. We're all actors on a stage, like, and that's a necessity for smooth human functioning. And that's something I think a lot of people can learn, like Gen Zers coming into the workplace, but also the other aspect of, what gives you meaning outside of your job. You're talking about photography. You really love photography. You're able to do it while you were in the CIA. And it's also something that you can be doing outside of the CIA, and you're not competing with anyone. That's another good life lesson for a lot of people, is that when you see other people doing well or people being promoted, there is this natural reaction to become competitive and say, what's wrong with me? Why am I not, getting promoted? Is instead of the more healthy, mature aspect of saying, well, what could I be doing differently? I can't just do my job like on rote, right? I have to be thinking about it in a more, independent, ambitious way, but not competing with other people. I think that can really screw you up. So I think they're just like what you're saying is a lot of good life lessons there for for everyone, not just for security professionals.
Trust, there's still some competition out there, right? Even in commercial photography, like I take
a little healthy competition, right? Is okay,
yeah.
But when it gets out of control to the point where you're being kind of self-destructive or hurting other people, I mean, that's a problem.
I'll tell you this story that's very relatable too. When I first, I'm not like this tree hugger nature photographer, right? Like I take pictures of like sports cars, downhill skiing, offshore boating. And when I first got out, I took a picture of Michael Jordan in his boat, right? He's got this boat called Catch 23. And there was a photographer who's a friend of mine now standing next to me. And he took a picture too, or he was taking pictures. We were standing on an inlet somewhere. And next day I look in the paper and there's a picture that only I could have taken, right? And so the other photographer is claiming that he took it. And I was like, no, I have the exact same picture. And so I called the newspaper and I was like, he's misidentifying this stuff. And because I looked at my picture and I looked at the one in the newspaper quickly, but then I actually went back and looked. It was not my picture.
Oh,
it was his. And I sent him a note and I said, I called the newspaper. I told him my mistake. And I said, I take this all on me, right? This is my fault. And I'm sorry. I actually threw him some work after that. He's thrown me work. Like,
good for you.
But what I realized at the time, Jessica, was I can't not be doing this business like the other business, right? And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to chill. I'm going to be friends with these other guys. I'm going to try to impart, sage wisdom on the younger people in this field. And so we're not all competitors, but we're all just trying to like make the world like more beautiful, right? I do it with boats. Other people do it with flowers and seals and birds or whatever. And I was like, and that was 4 years ago. That was during COVID, right? When I started the photography. And I feel like that was the right way to go, as opposed to being super highly competitive. And like in the ex-CIA world with consultants and people that work on their own, I would say we have exactly that. Partnerships, friends, sharing of leads, sharing of information. We all work in tandem together because there's enough work out there for all of us. Let's stop competing with each other. And that is a market shift from what I saw within the agency, where there is a lot of competition and there is a lot of camaraderie. It really depends on who your boss is, what office you're working for.
Right. That's good to hear. Finally, let's talk about that off-ramp. Do you have any tips for a retiring case officer when it comes to transitioning back to the civilian world?
Yeah, definitely. Make sure you max out your thrift savings plan more than a year before you get out. Get out of the G fund. That's my advice. No, I mean, seriously, know when to go, right? So first, know when to go. Have you stayed too long? That would be my first thing. So you need to like mentally assess where you are in your personal life, in your professional life, to say, am I really going to fight for that senior executive position 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever they are, right? Or is it time for me? Is the writing on the wall and I need to go? I think the military does a really good job at this, where you get passed over several times and then they just kind of force you out in the officer ranks. I think know when to go, and then have that plan, whatever that plan is. It should start before you retire, right? I had a friend of mine, he was from Florida, and he said, when I retire, I'm just going to smoke pot on my porch. So my plan is to buy a nice rocking chair. And that dude was serious. And as he explained it, he's like, I couldn't do it when I was working here. And that dude is like 54 years old. He bought a beach house. He sits on his front porch and smokes pot. But guess what? He had a plan. Like he had a real plan. And so whatever that plan is, right? And so start executing that plan before you get out. And so whether that's, if you're going to work on your own or you're looking for jobs and it's allowable, hey, you might want to consider not being a ghost on social media, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you just keep, if you were to go on LinkedIn and you say, hey, I'm looking for a job, and you post it to your 10 friends, LinkedIn's going to be like, we don't even know who this person is. Therefore, we're not going to show their post to anybody because they have no social media profile. I bet you they're a bot, right? They're not even a real person. And so you have to have this plan. And I think the agency would agree, even in today, that maybe you need to establish that LinkedIn profile, that Facebook for older folks, Instagram, if you're really progressive, Snapchat, whatever the other ones are, right? But you need to do that, and you need to articulate, what do I want in retirement? Do I want to work? Do I just want to live off my retirement? What are those things? And you better have that all mapped out, because the last thing you want to be doing is searching for mission after you retire, right? Yeah. Hey, I'm going to take a vacation for 4 months. I've heard this a lot, right? And like 2 weeks into the vacation, they're like either rejoining, they're doing something else for the government, and they're like, I can't sit still. I can't do this, right? And so one of the most patriotic, but the saddest things I've seen in my life too, in particular war zones, are the 65-year-olds in the war zone, and seeing, why are you there? And a lot of times it's financial. Why are you still there? What was your exit plan, right? And so, like, did you plan? And I've met very few that had like 5-year plan or a 2-year plan. You know, I'm going to make a lot of money and that's it, right? And then what happens when those war zones go away? You still make money, right? I don't know. Like, and so that's sort of separate, you know, conflict sort of stuff versus traditional.
Interesting. While you're speaking, because I'm an American, but most of my adult life has been in Israel, and my language is also somewhere in between. I don't know if this is just a term in Hebrew. I was curious if it's also a term in English. The term is green blood. Have you heard of this term?
What does it mean? I know red
Okay,
blood.
so I think it's a I think it's a Hebrew thing. So when I was considering a career in the intelligence community in Israel, there was a former field chief from the Mossad who kind of warned me. He said, if you like, you might get green blood from this, meaning that everything you do, it's so intense, right? This world is so intense, it becomes part of your identity. It's in your blood. And the problem is if you ever leave this world, or if you're thrown out of this world, everything else seems meaningless. If you are not like attached to state secrets, if you are not attached to this high adrenaline world, everything else will seem meaningless to you. That is a psychological danger that he wanted to warn me against in the early part of my career when I had choices on the table. And that kind of stuck with me. I thought that was interesting. And he was somebody actually who was able to maintain his marriage. He was able to find meaningful work outside of the security field once he retired from the Mossad. So I get the impression that this guy knew what he was talking about, but that was a warning. And I think that is something we've touched upon today. And I was just curious if that term green blood was also an English term, but I guess it's not.
I mean, I think in other words, your identity is tied to the job. These people, they were one track. And like, look, I mean, I think the world needs people like that, but I just, I loathe to think, what mental gymnastics, what other things are they doing to justify that? And I truly believe some people just have a death wish, like just like military guys. I deal with Americans in Ukraine right now, right? And they retired from the military and now they're fighting on the front lines, getting shot, getting killed. And they're like, and I said, why do you do it? And they're like, it's just what we do. Right? Like they can't even explain it. Like,
right.
But it's just what we do. And I was like, God bless you, man. Like you're fighting somebody else's war potentially on the front lines, and you're doing it. I mean, and you're prepared, and some have made the ultimate sacrifice for that war. Like that's to be applauded. But I don't know, like their family life, their kids' life, like are there a lot of repercussions because of those choices that you've made, or have you operated with reckless abandon and you just got on the first plane to Warsaw and took a train to Ukraine, right? Like that's I'm not in that, but I wonder about how these people do this, right? And I've met them, true patriots, right? Like just super patriotic people, and they see right and wrong very clearly.
It's not, I guess for me, what makes me curious is not how are they doing this? It's why. Where did they come from? What happened in their childhood? I'm sorry, I am the daughter of a psychotherapist, by the way. And it's like, what happened in their childhood? What happened along, their process of development that, affected those decisions? Like I completed a memoir recently, and, talking about my experience in the security field. And it's interesting because the first draft I wrote was pretty shitty, which a lot of first drafts tend to be, but I was trying to pinpoint why it was shitty. And the reason was I was not being honest about what I was really thinking at the time. It was a very surface level story in that first draft. I had to dig into the why. Why was I doing this? Why was I putting myself through all this craziness, through this hell, to get what I wanted? And then when you start to dig into the why, that's when the story becomes interesting. And I say that for not just myself, and as a writer, but for anybody. What is your why? And I don't know if everybody can answer that. I don't know if everyone has the self-awareness, like you're pointing out, that these guys are like, yeah, just do it. They're like a Nike commercial. They're like, just do it. But it's like, I mean, they have a why if they recognize it or not. And it's interesting what informs that why over a lifespan.
well, you work in an abnormal world, right? And so the only people you can relate with, what let's say you're the special ops guys, right? Is the other abnormal people, right? And I don't mean they're psychologically abnormal.
Right.
What I mean is if they're direct action, their job is to go and clear houses and kill people, right? And so from a societal point of view, they do an abnormal activity, right? Well, the only people that can relate to that abnormal activity are the other people around them, right? And so
Yeah.
they develop this camaraderie, team, a teamship between them. And when they try to go outside those circles, the people don't understand them, and they get into socially awkward situations, right? And so I highly respect special operations guys. I worked for them for 5 years. Like I really like what they do. But I replace special operations here with a bunch of case officers, right? You take out, direct action mission and you recruit. Last time I checked, espionage is illegal in every country in the world. So you're doing something that's inherently abnormal. And so your stories, the ability to relate to you, normal people can't do it. They don't understand you. And so you end up operating in the circles of people that understand you. That's it, right? And so you've insulated your world, and that insulated world just goes chronologically throughout your entire life. And that's the only thing that makes you happy, right? That's what I can see to it.
Right.
I like, for me personally, when I meet formers, we don't really talk about work. And I think I'm lucky because I see a lot of entrepreneurs that were like closet entrepreneurs inside and now they're out. And so we talk about opportunity. But like if I were to go to like a reunion and a bunch of people talking about war stories, I think I would leave. I can't, like, when I was a firefighter, I stopped. When I worked for DOD, I stopped. I never looked back. I never looked back. When I respected it, I still have fire department stuff. When I was CIA, when I stopped, I stopped. There's no regrets, right? There's no going back and looking at it. I'd say after these podcasts and stuff, there's definitely no going back. But that, and I've moved on. I got medals and all that fun stuff. But next adventure, next thing, right? Don't dwell on where you were. Move on. Like, and it doesn't matter if you're 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever it may be, right? There's some other career. You're really talented at stuff. And I'll end it with this story. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that used to do this job as well. And I was like, what the hell am I going to do in retirement? Right. I was like, I have a skill set that you cannot use commercially. And he had retired many years ago and worked commercially. And he's like, James, let me ask you a question. He said, if I parachuted you into a city somewhere in the world, how long would it take you to acclimate to that city? Right. And I was like, I'll do this. I was like, maybe 4 to 5 hours. He said, the average American, the answer is never, right? Never could they acclimate. And he said, I think you have a skill set you don't realize you have, right? And so you take things for granted. My friends just went to Europe and they planned their trip to a T, down to passport control, where we're going to stay, what we're going to do. I kind of just fly to Europe on a whim. Like I have no planning. I forget stuff. And it's because you know what to expect, right? And so you do have a skill set. And so whether you're 50 or 80, right, you need to like find people that are going to pull that skill set out of you, whether that's doing podcasts, writing a book, going to Hollywood. I know people that went to Hollywood, very successful screenwriters, people that consult on scripts for all your popular intelligence shows. A lot of guys were former agency. Whatever it may be, do it. And I remember in my retirement seminars, I think only 60% of the people had a plan. I think about 40% had absolutely no idea what they were going to do.
Look, James, I said it before, kids parties, okay? You do psychological magic tricks, you do photography, dead drops, it's like scavenger hunt. I mean, that's an obvious second career, from my perspective for CIA officers.
Yeah, kids don't find your profession fascinating. Like my son, he loves FBI, CIA. He's like, I don't know, Culinary Institute of America. Like he wouldn't even know what it is. Uh, and so they're not preconditioned. Like I could do adult birthday parties when you're on the softball team, right? Like, oh, come talk to the CIA guy sitting in the corner drinking by himself because no one else wants to talk to him. Like
Yeah,
it,
I don't know if you can shape a career out of that.
I look at it in two buckets. People who really want to know, they're obsessed with you, and then most of the people that are like, we don't care what you did, right? That
Oh,
they
you're a
don't they don't
government guy, whatever.
they don't find it like I live in Europe, and it took me forever to be able to say like I was CIA, like say it. I could say it, but I just couldn't
Yeah.
say it. And then finally, I started saying it, and people were like, "Yeah, we don't care," right? Like it wasn't such a huge secret that I thought it was, that I was built up. And now I also had people run away from me, right? And
Hmm,
so some people,
interesting.
they knew what it was, and they're like, "Oh, you didn't retire, you still work there." No, no, no. Like, and so you never know the reaction, but for the most part, the people are going to be they're going to be less enthralled than you thought they were. But don't, like
Well,
my wife always says, you're not as special as you think you are.
like I think it's great that you have a self-deprecating sense of humor. I feel like that is a saving grace also when it comes to mental well-being. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you giving me the time. I mean, you reached out to me, which I'm really honored. I still find you fascinating. I think Hollywood tends to find your type fascinating. But this is great. I learned so much today. It was so fascinating. I also feel like we need to start a book club, but that's a separate conversation.
I
But
have
yeah,
no
this was
patience to
great.
read books. Like Chat GPT will tell me the answer to the book, and then I'll be able to
Oh
discuss.
no. Oh no. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear
Uh,
that. Yeah, this was great, James. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much,
And
Jessica. I appreciate
yeah,
it, and I enjoyed it myself. And by
awesome.
the way, it's not like I've said this in so many places. Like I think you're the first for a lot of what
Wow.
we talked
That's
about.
awesome. That's really awesome. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to being in touch. And yeah, we have other topics for sure that we can talk about. So you go enjoy your photography. Whatever you're doing now, it's well earned. And yeah, it's been great to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.